This is the Patanjali Distinguished Speaker Series, which we've been conducting for some years. So I just want to say a few words about this. Who is Patanjali? Well, Patanjali, if you can read that, I guess it's much bigger on yours than it's on mine. So I just took something from Wiki to give you an idea. The Patanjali that we're referring to, there are several Patanjalis, by the way. The one that we're referring to with respect to this series is the Patanjali who authored the Yoga Sutras. And the Yoga Sutras are 196 Indian sutras in 4 chapters. You can read it yourself up here. And Patanjali was the person who put these things together. It's the ancient knowledge from people who came before him, and he put these together into the Yoga Sutras. There's some question about when he lived. It's not sure, but we always say it's before 400 CE. It may be as early as 200 or 300 years before BCE, but it's kind of lost in history. And there are other Patanjalis, and it's not clear whether they're the same person. Some of them is clear because there's a different time era. But Patanjali you come across. But the one we're talking about here with this is the Yoga Sutras author. And the idea was started some years ago with having a once-a-year seminar that reflects the spirit of Patanjali, not necessarily all about Yoga Sutras. So for example, in 2010 we had Eugene Taylor from Harvard Medical School who came and made a wonderful presentation about William James and pure experience and samadhi. The following year we had Robert Schneider from Maharishi University of Management. He's a cardiologist, well known for his research. And he spoke about mind, body, environment, and consciousness in Ayurveda. The year after, we had one of my mentors, medical psychologist Lawrence Lashan, and speaking on healing self and other, normality as shared neurosis. Larry Lashan authored one of the largest selling books on meditation. It's called How to Meditate. And he wrote it back in the 70s, and you can still buy fresh copies, new republications by going to Barnes & Noble or any other. Well, they'll have copies. It's been reprinted so many times. And to me, it's an excellent book in itself, worthwhile looking at. He wrote many other books, by the way, but one of his favorite topics was meditation. Then we had Martina Ziska, who was editor for a while of our Ayurveda health journal. We publish here a journal of Ayurvedic medicine. And she was, for a time, the editor of that. And a couple of years ago, we had a Vedic scholar from Stony Brook University, Andrew Nicholson, who came and talked about his Vedic scholarship and something. So that gives you an idea of what this is. And we have this once a year. And this year we're very pleased to have someone very, very special who's been here before, but not as a Patanjali distinguished speaker. And so we're very, very pleased to have him. This year we have Satyar Singh Khalsa, PhD, from Harvard Medical School, Brigham and Women's Hospital, but that's his day job. He has many other hats. As you'll see, he's the Director of Research for the Kundalini Research Institute. He's the Director of Research for the Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health in Western Massachusetts. He's a research associate with the Benson Henry Institute for Mind-Body Medicine. And there are a few other things, and I'm going to skip them because I think you get the idea. When we first were in contact this year, earlier in the year, I guess it was January or so, and we were trying to set this thing up, it was so hard. I wasn't sure we were going to be able to do it because his schedule is so full with things and events. So he's a very busy man, not a little due to the fact that he is invested in a yoga lifestyle, and he has been for many years. So he, as he puts it in his little bio here, he has been fully engaged in basic and clinical research on the effectiveness of yoga and meditation practices in improving physical and psychological health since 2001. And he's practiced a yoga lifestyle since 1971. So in addition to his work as a yoga instructor, a sought-after speaker, so we're very fortunate to get him here to be with us again today. He has a special interest in yoga in schools, which certainly is something that we, in the class IST 111, it is of high interest to us because that's what we are doing in IST 111. We're combining yoga and Western science. In any case, without further ado, I'm really delighted to be able to introduce to you my friend and colleague and delightful speaker, Satbir S. Khalsa.
It's an honor to be a part of the Patanjali series. Anyone who is familiar with yoga in any degree, Patanjali is a revered name because it's his sutras that really form a fundamental basis for a lot of theory and philosophy surrounding yoga. And one of the things Patanjali pointed out was that it's primarily a meditative component. Although in the West you see other components, you've seen an evolution of other components within yoga practice, including the postures, the breathing techniques, and the meditation. And that is the full practice set of yoga. That's traditional yoga. That's historically what yoga was. It was originally a technique for developing deeper states of consciousness through achieving better states of health and brain functioning. And so when I talk about yoga, I'm talking about that style of yoga because there's a lot of people that are practicing yoga in a very limited format. They're doing nothing but postures. And that's become popular. But what we're talking about, and most academics and scholars who work with yoga really talk about yoga as this comprehensive lifestyle practice. So this cartoon reads, in addition to 16 cup holders, it comes equipped with 4 dedicated yoga mat storage areas. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that yoga has become extremely popular in the West. And we have evidence for that. And it's not just popular in the West, actually, it's become very resurgently popular in India, largely due to actually one teacher named Swami Ramdev who goes around the country teaching to tens of thousands of people at a time. And he has his own satellite channel, and he's almost single-handedly revolutionized the popularity of yoga in India. But yoga now is pretty much popular internationally. This is a yoga center in Germany. This is International Yoga Day in Portugal. And we do have surveys that sort of verify this popularity of yoga. These surveys are mostly conducted in the US. This was done in early 2016. 36 million Americans are actively practicing yoga. That's a big number. Epidemiologically, 36 million people doing anything is big. But not only that, those people that were not practicing, if they had any expression of the fact that they were likely to try it, that's an additional 83 million. So not only is it popular, that popularity appears to be growing. And when you look at that growth in the surveys that were done in the previous 4-year intervals, you can see this enormous increase, jumping from 20 million to 36 million in 4 years. So this is what we would look at and call as an exponential trend, if anything. Now, this is also verified by a survey that was done by the federal government, by the Center for Disease Control and the National Institutes of Health. We're interested in studying integrative medicine practices in the general public. And this is the trend for yoga here. From 2002 to 2012, we now have 10% of the population actively practicing yoga for health purposes. So again, this is a very significant statistic, and again, you can see this exponential increase verified in this survey as well. So this was 4 years ago. So we're due for another survey, and I'm very interested to see where we're at in 2017. Now, anything that has those kinds of statistics, you would expect to see the evidence in the culture, and we do have that evidence. These are a couple of magazines well known to you. This cover says, dogs do it, kids do it, even desperate housewives do it. Why we've become a yoga nation. This, of course, is actress Eva Longoria, who played on that TV show, Desperate Housewives. This is famous model Christy Turlington, doing a posture I've never done, don't plan to do. And one of the problems with these kinds of images is that this is what the general public starts to think yoga is. And that is a problem, especially for those of us who are involved in using yoga for special populations or in clinical trials. People think you have to be flexible in order to practice yoga. It's something that thin, rich women who are wearing leotards do. And so that is a negative connotation that kind of sticks with yoga, unfortunately. Yoga is so popular that there are now 5 airports in the US and counting which have dedicated yoga rooms. You can practice yoga in these rooms during your layover from flight to flight. And these are major airports. This is San Francisco, Chicago O'Hare, and Dallas-Fort Worth. Pictures of kids practicing yoga outside with instructors here, and I draw your attention to this building. So during the 8 years of the Obama administration, during the Easter egg celebration on the White House lawn, we had yoga on the White House lawn as part of Michelle Obama's fitness program. Unfortunately, that is over. Frustration. These are remarkable photographs of New York Times Square on June 21st. For the past 10 years, they've been holding an International Yoga Day celebration on New York Times Square. So it's an international icon that's taken over all day long by yoga practice. 17,000 people in New York City registered to practice yoga on New York Times Square. And some of you may know that the current Prime Minister of India is an avid yoga practitioner, a proponent of yoga. In fact, he addressed the United Nations on the topic of yoga. And he made 3 points in his address to the United Nations. Number 1 is that it's not just a physical practice, it's a holistic practice. Number 2 is that it can be a healing practice, especially for a lot of the disease that we have. And then finally, he argued for the adoption of International Yoga Day. And accordingly, in December 2014, the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted International Day of Yoga. So this is significant. A lot of countries signed on to that resolution. So accordingly, in 2015, we saw the first International Day of Yoga. And here's Prime Minister Modi in New Delhi, the capital of India. He's practicing with a few friends here. And you can get an idea of just how many friends from an aerial shot here. Wow. There's 30,000 good friends practicing yoga with him. And of course, this was celebrated internationally in many countries. This is the base of the Eiffel Tower in Paris. These are all yoga mats. This is China. They're very organized in China. This is Kazakhstan. And this is a school in Kabul, Afghanistan. So it really has an international following. It's become so embedded in society that the advertising industry is well aware of the image and the impression of what yoga is to the general public. So they're using this positive image of yoga to actually sell products that have negative connotations. So on the left-hand side, they're selling vodka. This is a vodka bottle doing a headstand on a yoga mat. And here they're selling an over-the-counter sleeping pill. This morning was brought to you by A Good Night's Sleep. The idea being that if you buy their sleeping pill, you'll get a good night's sleep and be more willing to do your yoga in the morning. It's kind of like backwards, actually. So, and of course, you know you hit the big time when a big corporation like McDonald's is used it. So this was a few years ago. They had a DVD of yoga practice. And on my fruit and yogurt cup one day, there was somebody practicing unmistakably the yoga posture. So this cartoon reads, how is it we're the most successful species on the planet, yet we need to pay people to remind us to breathe and drink water? And it's true, as human beings, we don't have a lot of basic hygiene that comes, to us naturally, like some animals do. Animals have, they have hygiene that's built into their genes and their genetic makeup. We have to learn to brush our teeth. We have to learn body hygiene, mind hygiene, which is essentially what yoga is. So I'm a researcher in yoga, and some people who practice yoga may look at this quizzically and say, what's research got to do with yoga? I didn't go to yoga because I just read a research study, so why were we spending taxpayer dollars in doing research on yoga? And I can tell you, I feel like this cartoon. I'm one of those scientists that studies things that pretty much everyone already knows. So the rationale for doing research on yoga is actually a very important one. It comes from the demographics of that practice. You might say, well, why would you do research if so many people are already practicing? What's the point? It's already done. Well, the devil is in the details. And when you look at the breakdown of the demographics, it's really 75 to 80% women, so men are left out. It's really the middle-aged, so the children and the elderly are left out. And more disturbingly, it's well-educated and high-income populations. So it's really the privileged of society who have the resources and the knowledge to be able to access and practice yoga. So the people presumably that need yoga the most, lower socioeconomic minority classes, are left out of the picture. So how do we solve that with research? Well, there are several, and of course you see that disparity in children, because this is a talk about children. You can see again, it's really predominantly girls, and of course it's also skewed in terms of ethnicity. It's predominantly whites that are practicing yoga. So how do we get the entire population to practice yoga, and how does research fit into that? Well, there are systems in society that penetrate to all areas of the public, and that's the public schools, workplaces, and the healthcare system. If you can get yoga into those systems, you can get yoga across society. So you can make that happen if you can get yoga into those. And we are seeing a transition of yoga these days from ashram studios, yoga centers, gyms, and spas. We're starting to see it appear in professional society. Now, if we really want to make this happen, the problem with getting it into these places is that these places require evidence. They require validity, and that's where the research comes in. The research will feed that and justify the incorporation of yoga into these major societal components. Thanks to yoga, I now gently stretch to conclusions instead of jumping to them. And we're going to talk about emotional reactivity and stress reactivity, because those are major components of yoga practice. So let's talk about the psychophysiology of yoga. And we do have a good deal of information on this. This was an invited book from Harvard Health Publications that I agreed to do for the general public. And I only agreed to do this because it was attractive to have a book with the word yoga on it that also had the Harvard Medical School logo in their name on it. And this is also a sign of the times, because I can tell you 20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, this would have been inconceivable. And in fact, they approached me again recently to do a book, which was a Harvard Medical School Special Health Report, An Introduction to Yoga, and I served as the medical editor on this book. But we have summaries of the research and the summaries of the clinical research in this book that we recently published. This is a medical textbook that we published with 90 contributors, 60 yoga researchers contributing to this book. And in a chapter on this book, we talk about the psychophysiology of yoga, although this is really targeted more at the clinical application of yoga. But this is sort of the tip of the spear. This is yoga moving into professional society. This is our face to medicine and to professional society, to the workplace, and to the education system. In any field of science, when you start to see abundance of evidence of clinical trials in a certain area, scientists start to review that. And we do have reviews of the psychophysiology of yoga, this one here on reducing stress, on neurocognitive mechanisms, and on self-regulatory mechanisms, describing all the research about what we know about how yoga works. But let's start historically a little bit.